Mr. President, thank you. I'm going to speak about a really important bill that I'm hoping that we're going to pass right here on the Senate floor. It's passed, by the way, previously. It's called the Pay Our Military Act. And, Mr. President, it's pretty simple. In the event of a shutdown, and right now we're all working hard to make sure we avoid it, we need to make sure that the men and women who protect us get paid. That's it. Simple. Really, really simple. Now, I know back home in the great state of Alaska, there's a lot of frustration with our government. It seems like every day the Biden administration has another order to shut down Alaska, lock up our lands, put people out of work, skyrocketing prices on everything from gas to food, interest rates at 40-year highs, illegal immigration, which is just flooding across the southern border, a literal invasion happening right now. A lot of people are frustrated with what's happening. And the potential of a government shutdown is not going to help any of that, in my view. But, Mr. President, this is something that every member of the Senate should agree on. If there is a shutdown, a lot of us are working hard to avoid that. We need an insurance policy for our military personnel, the brave men and women who are serving on the front lines right now, at home, abroad, dangerous work, keep us safe. They need nothing less than the unwavering support of the United States Senate. The men and women who protect us often at great personal sacrifice. The least we can do as their representatives is to ensure that they receive their hard-earned pay regardless of the political circumstances that may unfold. My Pay Our Military Act is not about partisan politics, not about ideological differences. It's about fulfilling the solemn obligation to our troops and their families. And it's about providing them the stability and peace of mind that they need to do their jobs. Regardless of what happens here, they will continue to serve, to deploy, to train. We've seen in the last couple of weeks, training can also be very dangerous. Had some Marines recently killed down in Australia in an Osprey accident. The last thing these men and women need to worry about is whether or not they're going to get a paycheck next week, whether or not they're going to be able to support their families next week in the event there's a government shutdown. I want to emphasize again that I hope this bill is unnecessary, but the fact remains that this certainly could happen, a government shutdown. And if it does, we need to pay our military right now. Now, Mr. President, there's precedent, very strong precedent, on this very bill, this common sense bill that has historically received the strong support from both sides of the aisle and in both houses. Let me be specific. Facing an imminent government shutdown in 2013, which ended up lasting 16 days, this bill, Pay Our Military Act, was passed unanimously by the U.S. Senate and unanimously by the U.S. House and signed by the President. Congress recognized then the importance of uninterrupted military pay for our military members and their families. And the political makeup actually was the same. You had a Democrat in the White House, you had a Democrat-controlled Senate, and a Republican-controlled House. So, simple. While I urge my colleagues to put aside their differences and come together in a spirit of unity to support this bill, I am a little concerned. My colleague and friend, Senator Cruz, and I came down to the floor last week to pass another related bill. This would have guaranteed Coast Guard members got paid in a government shutdown. We did that because in 2019, the only branch of the military services that didn't get paid when there was a government shutdown was the Coast Guard. Everybody else got paid. The Coast Guard didn't. Senator Cruz and I came down here last week and said, hey, in the event of a shutdown, we got to make sure the Coast Guard gets paid. Well, it was blocked. It was blocked. I still don't know what my colleague from Washington State was talking about when she blocked it. Something about, well, the authority of the Appropriations Committee. What? Nobody cares about that. Do you support our troops or not? So this bill is even more simple. Our bill, Pay Our Military, covers all branches, including the Coast Guard, and civilians that the Department of Defense Secretary and Homeland Secretary believe are necessary also to pay. Now, Mr. President, again, I hope, like in 2013, this is going to pass unanimously. And as I mentioned last week, my colleague from Washington State objected to the Pay Our Coast Guard bill. It was confounding, particularly because she was a co-sponsor of the exact same bill in 2019. As a matter of fact, here's what she wrote in 2019. When there was a government shutdown and we were trying to pay the Coast Guard, it's absolutely unacceptable, this is the senator from Washington State, that our Coast Guard families went without their paychecks during the shutdown. We need to make sure President Trump doesn't put them through this again. Whoa, that was a senator from Washington State during the last shutdown. Wish you would have said that last week. So I'm very hopeful that what happened in 2013, Senate, House unanimously came together when there was an imminent shutdown and said, hey, we might not be able to figure out how to keep the government open, but here's one darn thing we're going to do. We're going to pay our military. Mr. President, I sure hope that we can do that again, and I sure hope people who want to try to use the military as political pawns leading up to a shutdown are not going to be tempted to object to this bipartisan, much-needed bill that 10 years ago had the support of everybody. I yield the floor. Yield to my colleague from Texas.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I rise today in support of my friend from Alaska in a plea to sanity and common sense in this body. We are 3 days away from an impending government shutdown. Now, I believe a shutdown is likely because I believe President Biden and Senator Schumer want a shutdown. I think they believe it benefits them politically to force a shutdown. Whether I'm right or wrong in that, everyone acknowledges there is a very significant risk of a shutdown 72 hours from now. As it stands right now, if we have that government shutdown 72 hours from now, our servicemen and women will still go to work. Our military will still show up. Even with a shutdown, the military has to do its job and keep this nation safe. But what will happen is their paychecks will go away. Now, last week, Senator Sullivan and I both came to the Senate floor seeking to pass my legislation, the Pay Our Coast Guards Act. That legislation is bipartisan. I'm the ranking member on the Senate Commerce Committee. It was authored by me and co-sponsored by Maria Cantwell, the chairman of the Senate Commerce Committee. It was also co-sponsored by Senator Sullivan and Senator Tammy Baldwin, the chairman and ranking member of the Coast Guard Subcommittee. The reason my legislation last week was introduced is the last time we had a shutdown in 2019, the Schumer shutdown. The government was shut down for 34 days, and soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines were paid because the Department of Defense appropriations had been passed. But Coast Guardsmen were not, because they're not under DOD, they're under the Department of Homeland Security. So for 34 days, heroic Coast Guardsmen guarded our coast, saved people off the coast of Texas, were there when people needed them in times of disaster, and yet they didn't get a paycheck. That was wrong, and in 2019, Senator Sullivan and I came to the Senate floor then and tried to pass a bill to pay our Coast Guardsmen in the middle of the Schumer shutdown, and the Democrats objected. Democrat leadership said, no, we will not pay our Coast Guardsmen. Well, last week I tried to say we got bipartisan legislation. Let's do it right. Let's not hurt brave young men and women who are protecting this country. Unfortunately, Democrat leadership stood up and uttered two words, "I object." And in fact, the senator from Washington had an argument that I found thoroughly curious. She said, well, this bill that Cruz and Sullivan are trying to pass, it wouldn't technically mandate that Coast Guardsmen be paid, because what the bill provided is they should be paid if soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines are paid. So it argued we should treat the military evenly and fairly and not discriminate against the Coast Guard. She said, that's the reason I'm objecting, because it doesn't mandate that it happens. Well, you know what? What the senator from Washington asked for is what we are right here now doing. This bill does what she said last week was the reason she was objecting. That's what this bill does. 10 years ago, this bill passed the Senate 100-0. You and I were both in the Senate. That means you voted for it and I voted for it. That means the senator from Washington voted for it. It means the House passed it unanimously. But in the decade that has passed, I guess common sense has gone out the window. So I want to say something right now to every soldier, every sailor, every airman, every Marine, every Coast Guardsman, every member of the Space Force. If you're a 19-year-old private or corporal stationed at Fort Bliss right now, next week, there's a very good chance your paycheck is going away. We're going to find out in just a few moments whether or not your paycheck is going away. And just listen very carefully for two words. If we hear two words from the senator from Washington, the words, "I object," those two words uttered on behalf of Democrat leadership will kill this bill. And when your paycheck goes away next week, understand you would have been paid, except for the fact that Democrat leadership decided it's in their political interest to hold that 19-year-old private hostage. Never mind that you can't pay for groceries for your wife and kid that week. Never mind that you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your bills. Never mind a Marine who's stationed in harm's way, that your paycheck is going to go away. Why? Because partisanship is so rife in this town that the Democrat leadership believed they could hold these young fighting men and women hostage and pay no political price. I hope the senator from Washington listens to what I've said and what the senator from Alaska has said and decides, you know, it's not right to hold these brave men and women hostage. We're not going to do it. I hope Democrat leadership puts principle above partisan politics. But we're about to find out.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Appropriations Committee be discharged from further consideration of S. 2835 and the Senate proceed to its immediate consideration. I further ask that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object. I share my colleagues' concern about making sure that our service members don't miss a paycheck because of a potential government shutdown. In fact, I don't want any of our federal workers to miss a paycheck or any of the programs families rely on to be undermined by a completely unnecessary shutdown, which is why I am working around the clock to make sure that we pass the bipartisan CR package, which we released yesterday. Because that's the only serious issue and solution here. That's the only way we make sure that everyone is able to keep doing the work that the American people count on and getting the paycheck they deserve. Let's be real. There are a lot of programs I care about, a lot of programs we all care about that would be hurt by a shutdown. So we are not going to solve this problem one by one, bit by bit, carve out by carve out. You do not stop a flood one drop at a time. You build a dam. We do have a straightforward, bipartisan CR package to avoid a shutdown and keep our military paid. We should do our jobs, get that done, and get it passed. That is principle, Mr. President, not politics. Do our job, pass this bill so we don't have a shutdown. I object.
Mr. President.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, what you just saw in my
Senator from
view
Alaska.
was, Mr. President,
Senator from Alaska is recognized.
thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as my colleague Senator Cruz just mentioned, every member of the military just heard I object. And the senator from Washington State just said, let's be real. Let's be real. There's nothing more real than putting your life on the line for the country you love. And nothing more important than defending those who defend us. Let's be real. Having a hard time with let's be real. What she just mentioned had nothing to do with the bill. Again, 10 years ago, when there was an imminent shutdown, just like there is today, which I certainly don't want, the Senate and House and White House came together and said, all right, we know there's a risk, but there are some special people who serve in our government, in my view, very special people, who deserve to be taken care of. It's the men and women and their families who are serving right now, overseas, all over the country, protecting Americans. It is an outrage. It is an outrage to utter those two words. I object. It is an outrage. And if it happens next week, as Senator Cruz mentioned, that there are young men and women around the world protecting us without getting paid and having to worry where they're going to buy or how they're going to buy groceries, I hope they remember the senator from Washington State's two words, I object. That was good old-fashioned hostage taking. Making a Marine Lance Corporal all of a sudden subject to the political whims of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Didn't happen in 2013. I have no idea, truthfully, no idea why my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would not support this pay our military bill. I'm going to keep coming down here all week to get this passed, and hopefully they'll have a change of heart. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I am very frequently in complete agreement with my friend and colleague from Alaska. I do disagree with two words he just said. He said this was good old-fashioned hostage-taking. There's nothing old-fashioned about this. This is brand new. Even the Democrats, as partisan as they've been, they haven't done this before. 10 years ago, every Democrat, even the most left-wing Democrat, agreed we should pay our servicemen and women. This hostage-taking is brand new. You want to see the face of vicious partisanship in Washington? You just did. Now, I'll point out also two things that are blazingly obvious. Number one, last week, when the senator from Washington objected to my legislation to pay our Coast Guard, to treat our Coast Guardsmen the same as other active duty military, she stood up and gave a speech in which she said she supported that goal, but the bill that I introduced didn't mandate that it happen. It only said they had to be treated with parity, and that's why she objected. So Senator Sullivan and I came and introduced the bill she asked for that mandated that all of the military be paid. She didn't explain or change a position. But what she did implicitly is say every word she said last week was not true. That the reason she gave for objecting to my bill apparently was not the reason she was objecting to the bill. Because she just objected right here. And I got to say, listen, every member of this body, every Democrat, when you go home to your state, when you meet with active duty military, when you meet with veterans, I guarantee you every member of this body says, I support the troops. Well, as long as Democrat leadership keeps doing what they just did, it ain't true that you support the troops. And I want to point out right now, there are some Democrats who might try to hide behind the skirts of their leadership and say, we didn't object. There are no Democrats on this floor. Nobody is here with us. The senator from Washington didn't even bother to stay and participate in the debate. That's how little she's interested in the merits of this issue. What she said, and I want you to hear the argument she gave. She said now, the new reason she's objecting is she says she wants everyone to be paid. And if everyone can't be paid, then nobody will be paid. Understand, she is telling the young Marine stationed just a mile from North Korea, facing machine guns, that it is the position of Senate Democrats that they care more about paying IRS agents and EPA regulators and bureaucrats than they do about that young Marine. Right now, there's a sailor in a nuclear submarine a mile underwater who may not even know it, but her paycheck is likely to disappear in 3 days. And Senate Democrats have said, there's no difference. You know what the military is often referred to as the 1%? There is a difference. The men and women who put on the uniform and take the oath and defend this nation. And my hope is that somewhere in the Democrat Party, saner voices will prevail. I get there's an attraction to, we got a partisan fight. I get that Democrats want to try to stick it to Republicans, but don't scapegoat the military in the process. And I want to speak to the moment to the press. Part of the reasons the Democrats are objecting is they are confident CNN will not report on this. They are confident MSNBC will not say a word about this. They're confident if you turn on the nightly news, ABC, NBC, CBS will not say a word. And they believe that come Monday, when that young soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, his or her paycheck disappears, they believe that they'll never know it was the Democrats who blocked their paycheck who objected to it. Well, it's up to the media to decide, are they actually journalists? Are they going to report on what happened? If we end up having a shutdown, I can promise you, Senator Sullivan and I will be back. We will be on this floor, and we'll see just how many times the Democrats want to object to paying our active duty military. Mind you, they got to work. They will show up at work regardless. But maybe it's the position of today's Democrat Party that you can show up and work and defend this nation and keep us safe, but Democrats aren't going to pay you. That's really sad. It's unfortunate. I see my friend, the senator from Virginia, has come in on another matter. I hope voices like his will say to his leadership, this is dumb. Don't hold our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and Coast Guardsmen hostage over a political fight in Washington. If politicians can't get their act together by September 30th, don't punish the active duty military. I know the senator from Virginia cares about those active duty military. It's right now his party that's blocking their paychecks. So my hope is that saner voices prevail in the Democrat Party. I hope we can come back here, do this exact same thing with one minor alteration. That next time we eliminate those two words, I object. And once the Democrats decide no longer to say the words, I object, this bill will pass, the House will pass it, and our fighting men and women will get the paychecks they have earned. They've earned with courage and blood. We owe it to them. This body needs to do the right thing. I yield the floor.